Beast of Reincarnation is a solid 7 out of 10, and the only reason it isn't an 8 or a 9 is that a mediocre story moving at a glacial pace got welded to some of the poorest enemy design I've seen in a game in a while. And a pseudo-Souls-like boss design is the one feature you cannot afford to fail, which is exactly the one they whiffed on the hardest, and everything good in this game has to constantly be fighting against that. So I'll give my answer up front, I cannot recommend this at $60, because on sale or through Game Pass Ultimate where it landed on day 1, it makes for a solid weekend adventure, and at full price it's competing with games that don't run out of ideas halfway through the adventure. I had a good time across my hours spent in post-apocalyptic Japan, and there is a lot to like in here, but I can almost guarantee you have something better sitting on your backlog right now that you've been neglecting for years. And yes, we should mention right away, this is Game Freak's first swing outside of Pokemon in a very long time, and much like the past 15 years of Pokemon games, it leaves you feeling underwhelmed at the fact this could have been so much more special, with just a little bit more effort and care. The setting is where this game is at its strongest, and it's the thing that kept me going long after the rest of it had stopped giving me anything new. Futuristic cyborg tech fused with blighted, overgrown monsters is one of the coolest worlds I've played through in a long time. You fight mechanical golems in one encounter and a stag monster wrapped in vines and flowering tendrils in the next. It's post-apocalyptic Japan where the thing killing everything is also the only thing still growing, and the first couple hours of fighting your way through that are as fresh as anything I've played through this year. You're dropped into that world as Emma, a sealer, infected by the blight and shunned by other humans, whose entire purpose in life is to hunt these monsters down and kill them, and whose main directive from the opening hour is to stop the beast of reincarnation that has risen up again. She's not doing it alone either, because she has Ku, a wolf she saved from an injury who became her battle buddy. That's the premise, and it's a fairly decent one. What helps it is the creature design, which is where Game Freak's decades of experience making monsters actually shows itself. The Nushi especially, the giant boss Malefax that grow blighted forests around themselves, are armored in leaves and roots and tendrils in a way that's equally beautiful as it is menacing. So even when a fight is going badly, you're at least looking at something incredible while it happens. The graphics assist in that department too. Nothing about the visual presentation detracted from my experience at any point, and I personally played on max settings at 1440p at around 80 to 90 FPS the whole way through, with very little in the way of frame drops or crashes. So the art direction has solid legs to work with, and the tech side of things didn't drag anything down, at least for me. The world does its job well, but the story is a different conversation. The story is just okay. It does get somewhere eventually, there's a payoff, the world premise underneath it is pretty fascinating, and by the end I was actually interested in how it resolved. The problem is everything in between the intro and that final stretch moves at a pace so glacial it becomes the defining feature of my entire experience. There was one time about midway through, I was actually counting the time the cutscenes took, and a combination of a few of them chained back to back was over 13 minutes long. Needless to say, I got pretty checked out from that. You get filler dialogue in Act or 2 that could be cut without anyone noticing, and stretches where the game explains its own lore back to back through different characters delivering variations of the same information. So you're sitting through the same revelation multiple times, cutscenes overstay their welcome and frequently won't let you skip them, which turns those stretches into something you'd endure rather than enjoy. Early on especially, the pacing kills all the momentum to the point where there are multiple moments I wish the story just wasn't in the game at all, because every time it showed up, the flow stopped dead in its tracks. The comparison I keep landing on for this game is Jedi Survivor, and I vastly preferred its story and characters by a wide margin. This game has serviceable writing delivered at the worst possible speed. That's not optimal when the combat has also stopped surprising you around the same time. And it's even rougher still when the people delivering all of this dialogue are as deep as a puddle. Ku is an exception, and he's one of the highlights of the cast by a decent margin. He fights on his own between your commands, he has a full progression tree of his own, and because the Bloom Art gauge economy ties him directly to your parries, he stays within your mind even when all your attention is on your own timing. He's a stronger, smarter Palico with a bond attached, and Emma and Ku together are the only part of this writing that's consistently at least decent. Which, when a speechless wolf is one of your top characters, you probably went wrong somewhere. Everybody else is where it falls apart, because every human side character here is bland, one note, and given nowhere near enough quality writing to become anything more, so you'll forget most of their names before the credits roll and spend their scenes counting down until the spotlight moves on. Your two main crew members, Brad and Kagura, are the clearest illustration of that. Brad is the old man piloting the walker, covered head to toe in protective gear, and he's written entirely around the fact that he obviously knows more than he's telling you. So he hints and deflects and tells you to come back to the walker for now, and the game keeps that valve shut for dozens of hours because the plot conveniently wants it shut rather than because it makes sense for the character to have a reason to. This allows for you to piece together things yourself and makes Brad feel pretty much pointless. He does anchor the crew and makes the walker feel lived in, and past that there's not much else to hold on to with him. Kagura at least starts out from a stronger place, since she's the orphan girl Emma pulls out of the wreckage early on and who stays aboard doing the cooking and the cleaning after a miserable life where nobody showed her any basic kindness. The game even builds a rapport system around her the same way it does with Ku, where talking to her raises your bond and unlocks perks, so the intent was clear for you to invest in her, but what actually happens is that she functions as the cooking menu with some dialogue attached, and her scenes feel more like an obligation to clear before you head back out. That Cleanse Walker is your hub, a bipedal mech that stomps between zones with your whole crew inside it, and it houses your weapon upgrades, your cooking, your crops, and your research, which makes it your home base. The walker is called Baura, and runs on 3 stats named Power, Calculations, and Knowledge. You'll raise those by hauling back the skull-shaped devices you loot off golems, the blue, green, and yellow ones, and dropping them off after your time exploring. The walker really isn't optional maintenance, so much as the thing that's gating your damage for the entire game, so you will want to find this skull-shaped loot. The same goes for the farming and cooking loop. Seeds and rice and food you pick up out in the world go into the greenhouse to grow. You can raise chickens in there alongside them, and Kagura turns all of it into meals from recipes you find or buy that buff your health, attack, defense, or elemental resistance before you head out. Similar to something like Monster Hunter. I pretty much just ignored it in this entire game and left Kagura to her own devices because quite frankly the cooking process is very slow, tedious, boring, and has very little payoff in the form of stats. Movement is the other absolute win here, and it all runs through Emma's hair powers, which is a very creative use of her blight infection. Her hair grows vine structures on command, so you bridge gaps with it, pull yourself up walls, swing across the zone, and reach ledges the game otherwise gates off. And I cannot stress enough how snappy and satisfying that becomes once you understand all the buttons you're able to press, although it is a little bit confusing at first. What makes it even better is that it's more than just a traversal toy. It comes straight into fights with you because you can hair around a shielded golem instead of grinding your way through it, close distances across an arena with a grapple, or reposition mid-encounter with some of your bloom art skills. Some of the best moments I had in this game came out of how I interacted with those movement skills, and it also made me want to go looking through every corner of every zone, and that is a form of disappointment for me. Because this is a pseudo open world built out of large zones, you work through over the course of the game, and moving through them is fun enough that combing every inch feels like the obvious thing to do. Unfortunately in this game, the rewards just don't justify it. I check every corner of every map in every game I play by default, and early on in this one I just stopped. Because strongboxes and side paths mostly cough up basic amber, crafting material, and golem skulls you'll accumulate passively anyway. Ku makes it worse rather than better, since he's constantly in your ear barking about this item and that item and enemy over here, which was annoying on its own, and doubly so because he's alerting me to junk I just don't care about. When your companion is hyping up loot that isn't worth walking to, the pop-ups and the game in general started to feel like busy work instead of something that I wanted to enjoy. The other structure of exploration that you will be familiar with, and why it's compared to other Souls-like, is that campsites work as your bonfires, so you can rest to save, upgrade, and respawn every enemy in the area, And Dragon Vein shrines, manuals, and research pickups fill out your map objectives. None of it is really worth going out of your way for, given that the stim packs in the later part of the game give extremely weak healing anyway. So what's left pulling you through these zones is the combat waiting at the end of them, which is the equal parts great and frustrating heart of this whole game. Playing as Emma is excellent because katana combos, dodges, parries, hair skill usage, and commanding Ku all stack into something that's an absolute blast, and the combat designers did phenomenal work tying it together. The piece holding it all up is the Bloom Art gauge, which fills as you land hits and fills even faster when you parry, and which you then spend on Emma's skills or Ku's, with time slowing down while you pick them. Your defense literally pays for your offense, which is the smartest thing in this game design, and it's the reason playing without parrying cuts you off from a huge portion of what Emma and Ku can do. You can certainly hack and slash your way to the end credits if you want, so this isn't mandatory to beat the game, but it's mandatory to actually experience the most fun parts of it. And if you're someone who doesn't like parry-based games, you're not going to have a good time with this game. On top of that system are the spirit zones you slot into your armor, which stack together and are basically just giant conditional stat boosts. These often tie into your parrying, so it's even more crucial that you get off a clean parry because it'll turn into big damage. You can also pair Ku with a charm that amplifies the same element on his Bloom Art, and you'll have something resembling a build for him. And for the first 10 hours, this was one of the more interesting action combat systems of the year for me. The trouble is that the systems around it never grow to match it, and the QTE that fires when you call a Bloom Art is the first hint of that. Because it's so easy, it may as well not even exist, and cutting it entirely would cost the combat absolutely nothing. The shallowness of that runs a lot deeper than one throwaway QTE, because the build crafting is where I have to pump the brakes hard. Every katana in the game shares the same moveset, their base stats sit close enough together that swapping rarely feels like a decision, and the actual difference between blades is the passive that fires when you land a perfect parry. Whether that's calling down an area of effect on your slashes or stacking bonus damage over a timed window, picking one can change how you want to spend your counterattack windows, and that's pretty much the whole extent of your expression, because Emma fights almost identically no matter which blade is in her hands. For 99% of the game, I just picked whatever blade was super effective against the boss I was fighting against. Armor manages to be even worse, since progression through it is flatly linear, with each piece handing you defense, a number of spirit stone slots, an enemy awareness value controlling how fast the detection gauge fills, if you're playing stealthy, and elemental resistance on some sets. There's no build defining piece and no trade-off to weigh. So you find the newer set and you probably equip the newer set, and none of it changes how Emma looks either. I don't need my character to look different every hour, and that part I can live with. But when a studio won't tie visual identity progression, it signals a lack of care that I think you can feel everywhere else in this game as well. The last thing left is stat leveling at campsites across 3 options: strength for attack and defense, vitality for health, and fluorescence for skill power. Plus skill points from kills going into 2 skill trees, one for Emma and one for Ku. Those trees are the one place your new toys actually come from, since they hand out real moves instead of just percentages. And they're doing an enormous amount of heavy lifting to keep the progression feeling satisfying. They'd still be enough if the things you were fighting demanded that you use them. The problem is that they don't, and that brings me to the biggest problem in the game, which is that the enemies have almost nothing to do. Most of them have about 2 attack chains, and that's the entire moveset. So in a parry-based game, you've solved that enemy the first time you've met it, and every encounter after is another training session. And that would still be fine if the roster expanded as the game went on, except it really just doesn't. I played on hard throughout, and the difficulty came almost entirely from getting grouped up on, which this game handles very poorly. The one-on-one combat I personally found to be fairly easy and pretty satisfying. If they would have just handed every one of them 1 or 2 more attacks and tightened the combat up, this could have been one of the better games in its genre. But instead, at points, it felt like an alpha build of Monster Hunter where the monsters were just incomplete. The Nushi repeat their patterns and then repeat themselves, with the same fights returning multiple times across the campaign, and almost all of them carry a second phase explained in the fiction by Blight rushing in as the Malefact weakens. So a fight you've already solved gets extended by another health bar. Or even worse, 2 or 3 in the form of extra fights, instead of new ideas. The worst offenders are the enormous ones, because several main Nushi are scaled far larger than Emma, and past that scale you stop fighting the boss and start fighting the camera, which every Souls player knows from every dragon they've ever been shoved in front of. You spend those encounters staring at a leg, guessing at what the rest of the body is doing off screen, while foliage and effects fill everything you can see, and dying to that teaches you really nothing at all. Which in itself is obviously a problem because parry-based combat lives or dies on enemy readability, and this is partially where the game dies for me. Beast of Reincarnation has one of the coolest settings I've ever played in, hair traversal that makes movement a highlight and combat that's a blast from Emma's side of the screen. But unfortunately, it runs out of new ideas at about the 10-hour mark, and then asks you to play another 20 to finish up its middling story. Enemies have 2 attacks each, bosses too big for the camera to handle, equipment progression with no expression in it, and a supporting cast with nothing important to say. It's a solid 7 out of 10, and if they'd cooked the boss designs longer and given the enemy roster another pass, this could have been an easy 8 or 8.5, because the foundation is there. The generic, vanilla, repetitive nature of the last 20 to 30 hours is what leaves way too much to be desired. If you've played Beast of Reincarnation, tell me in the comments what you think about it so far, and hopefully we can help others decide whether this game is for them. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.